I hope that you are well and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 1 English lesson on verb tenses. And before we start with our lesson on verb tenses, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, once we select the username, once we have once you've typed in the username as well as the password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 1, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of verb tenses. All right, so if we look at the word tenses, right, especially verb tenses, and we start with tenses. So if we start with the word tenses, and then it means that we are basically um, focusing on anything that is in present, past, or in future tense, right? And if we're specifically making mention of verb tenses, and then it's basically the action that's in the present, the action that's in the past, and the action that's in the future tense. All right. So, like we say, verb tenses tells us the action that's happening in the present, the actions that is happening in the past, as well as in the future. All right. So, our chapter is verb tense. Our subject is English language arts, grade 1. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of verb tense is to select the sentence that tells us about the present, select the sentence that tells us about the past, and select the sentence that tells you about the future. All right, so when it comes to our tenses, right, then some verbs they tell you about something that had already or that has already happened. So some of the verbs tells you about things that has already happened, right? And if things had already happened, and then it means it is either in the past because it had happened. So some verbs they tell you about something that had already happened. And these verbs they tell you about the past, right? And if they tell you about the past, then they usually end in ed. And that is basically also a regular verb. If we look at an example, it says we walked to the store yesterday, which means that our verb, right, that tells us about something that had already happened, that ends in ed, is walk. And this basically shows the past, shows the action that happened in the past. So we walked to the store yesterday. And the show started last week. So the show started last week. So that is two examples of verbs that tells us about the past. And like we say, it ends in ed. And then we have some verbs that tells you about something that is happening now. Then some verbs tells you about something that is happening now and something that is happening now, right? These verb tells you about the present. All right. And the verbs that tells us about the present, right? They usually have no ending. So it's either they have no ending or they just end in s. So it's either there's no ending or the end in s. And if you look at examples, right, it says, we walk to school today. So we walk to school today, which means that our verb tense, right, or the action that is taking place, like now in the present, is walk. So the action that is taking place is walk, and that is happening now. And the parade starts now. So the word starts. It's where they say it either has no ending or they end in an S. But now, if we look at both of those examples, right, it says we, referring to more than one person, right? We referring to more than one person walk to school, which means that if more than one person is doing an action, then there's no ending. But if it shows that one person thing is doing an action, if it shows it's one person or one thing doing an action, and then they end in an S, basically the verb ends with an S. For example, the parade starts now. It's one event, which is the parade, and it says it starts now. And then we have some verbs that tells you about the future. So some verbs tells you about something that's going to happen. And these verbs will tell you about the future. And they use the word will. Right? So the verbs that tell you about the future. So the future means that it must still happen. It did not happen yet. It's not happening now. It must still happen in the future. Or it will happen in the future. The future can be tomorrow, can be next week, can be next month, can be next year. But it tells you about the future. It tells you about something that is going to happen. So we then use the word will. And if we look at an example of the future tense, right? It says we will walk to the park next week, which means that our verb, right, in the past tense, it will basically start with will walk. So the word will in front of that verb tells us that it is in the future. Will walk, and they're specifically saying next week, which is in the future. If you were having a party, like a birthday party or something for you or your siblings, right? And we're just waiting on everybody to arrive. And then we say the party will start soon. So will starts. Instead of saying the party will start, But if we are referring to the future, then we'll be like, it will start soon. So will start. And that is basically our verb tenses. Because I basically gave you an examples now of our verbs in the past, in the present, as well as in the future, right? And we specifically said that the verbs in the past, they usually end in ed, and they tell us about something that has already happened, that's in the past. It happened already, it is past. In the present, verbs that tell us about something that is happening now. So that is in the present. So it's either they have no ending or they end in s. And then some verbs tell you about something that is going to happen. And these verbs tell you about the future, right? And we use the word will in front of that verb to show the action in the future. All right. And we're going to do our tutorial lesson on A plus students.ca. All right, so now we're going to A plus students.ca. Our chapter is verb tense. And we're going to the first lesson where it is to select the sentence that tells you about the present, which is now. Something that is happening now. And it says, this one over here. Some verbs tell you about something that is happening now. So something that is happening now, these verbs will tell us about the present. Yeah, so something present tense is something that is happening now. And when something is happening now, right, which is in the present, the present tense verbs, they usually either have no ending when we are referring to more than one person, or if you're referring to one person or one thing doing an action, then they end in S. So some verbs they tell you about something that is happening now, and these verbs tell you about the present. And once again, if you look at the example, it says, I walk to school today. So I walk to school today. So which means that our present tense verb is walk. It basically tells us the action that the person is doing now. And the parade starts now. And as we can see, that word, the verb, ends in an S. So starts now. And that is basically the verbs that tells you about something that is happening now. And that is basically in the present, which is our present tense. And like we say, the present tense either has no ending. So our verb has no ending. And usually the verb has no ending when we are referring to more than one person or more than one thing doing an action. And we say that if it is referring to one person or thing that is doing an action, and then our verb ends with an S. For example, the parade starts now, referring to one thing doing an action. All right. So if we look at the verb right within each of these sentences, they say they want to know which one tells us about the present, meaning something that is happening now. The present is something that is happening now, right? The first one says, I see mom over there. The verb see, it has no ending, right? It has no ending. And it tells about something that is happening now. So, meaning I see mom now, right? Over there. And that is basically our present tense. And then if you look at the second one, the sentence, it says, it hopped on one foot for a long time. The verb hopped ends in ed. So it means that it tells about something that happened already, which means that we are not dealing with the second sentence. So this first sentence that says, I see mom over there, that is basically our present tense verb sentence. So I see mom over there, and that is basically, it tells about something that is happening now, and it tells us about the present, something that is happening now, which is present. All right. If we look at this sentence, it says, I want some eggs, please. I want some eggs, please. So the verb want, I want eggs. So the verb want has no ending. And the verb want, it has no ending, and it tells about something that is happening now. And we call that the present tense. All right. So he says, I want some eggs, please. That sentence is in the present. It is now. All right. Now let's go to our test. So we're going to our test. So we're going to have to say which sentence tells us about the sentence. And remember, so which sentence tells us about the present? So which sentence tells you about the present? She thinks about her trip all the time. We will paint our room blue. We were going to the pools. Or I washed the dishes. All right. So she thinks about her trip all the time. And if it means that we must choose the first option, she thinks it's something that she's doing now about her trip all the time. And that is correct. That is a sentence that is in the present tense. Which sentence tells us about the present? I will walk to the zoo. So we need to say which sentence tells us about the present, something that is happening now. It says, I will walk to the zoo. I live in that yellow house. He walked the dog, and Robin will join us. So we need to say which sentence is in the present. Is it I will walk to the zoo? So I will walk to the zoo. Nope. I live in that yellow house. So we're going with the second one. I live in that yellow house. And that is the present tense. Which sentence tells us about the present? Liz and her friends jump high. So Liz and her friends jump high. I will talk to Nina. She lived in Paris, and they watched that movie in the cinema, which means that we're going to go with the first option. Just Liz and her friends jump high. All right. So it says she pulled. She pulled a rabbit out of her hat. John was lost in the ocean, or our dog wags his tail. And if we show the action that is taking place now, we can say the dog wags his tail. Then that basically tells us about the present, sorry. Oopsie. Now we're going to select the sentence that tells us about the past. And verbs that tells us about the past, right? It says some verbs that tell you about something that has already happened. So we say some verbs that tell us about something that has already happened. And these verbs, they tell us about the past. And the verbs that tell us about the past, they end in ed. So we say that the verbs that tell us about something that has already happened, that is in the past, and they usually end in ed. And the verbs that tell us about the past, they usually end in ed. All right, so now we're going to our test. So we're going to our test. And these are the sentences that tells us about the past. So we need to select a sentence that tells us about the past, something that happened already. The party just started. And we will work very hard. The dog is barking. Grandma will make the cake. All right, and if we choose the word in the past, we will, the dog just started. So the party just started. And that is basically the past. They ride their bikes to the store. We need to find a sentence that's in the past that happened already. They ride their bike to the store, or we laughed at the silly picture. He will walk to the party, or grandma is making dinner now. So now we need to tell us about the sentence that's in the past. And remember, we said sentences that's in the past, they usually end in ed, the verb. So basically, which sentence tells us about the rain? And then we will say, in the past, So which sentence tells about the past? Sorry. Then we say we laughed at the silly picture. So which sentence tells about the past? Is it they ride their bikes to the store? So which sports tells about the past? So which sentence tells about the past? It says they ride their bikes to the store. Nope. He laughed at the silly picture. So we said which sentence tells about the past. So which sentence tells about the past? And we said it's we laughed at the silly picture. And laughed is correct. So in the past, we can say she loved my song about animals. All right. So in the past, we can say she loved my song and animals. Right? All right. So that is basically our that's basically the sentences that tells us in the present as well as in the past. Right? And we said the verb tenses. It is basically the action that is happening either now, which in the present tense, that happened already, which is in the past tense, and words that will happen is in the future tense. All right, grade one. Thank you for joining our lesson. Goodbye. All right. And remember, before we even go into one of these, right, it says present, past, and future. So the present tense, it is the creating a sentence that is happening now. That is basically in the present tense. All right. So grade ones, this is the end of our lesson on verb tenses. Goodbye.